Between limb and infamy. United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces. To overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Well, as you notice, I'm wearing a CB shirt. CB, I was in the U.S. Navy Seabees during World War II. Entered when I was 18 years old, right out of high school. And I served basic training in Sampson, New York, from July to September 1944. There, we were there for a period of about 8 to 10 weeks. And that's where we learned basic left from right and did all the training that was necessary. And then in September, I was sent for advanced training. And that's where I first learned that I would be in the Land Navy, the Seabees, in Davisville, Rhode Island. That was in September 1944. At Davisville, we did field training, and it was winter training, primarily with Brownie automatic rifles and with M1 Garand rifles, which are used in Europe. With all this equipment, which was heavy equipment and so forth, we were sent across the states into the, California, where at Part Hueneme, which was right above Los Angeles, we had additional training there, which was with tropical equipment. We got rid of our winter equipment, and we got tropical equipment. And at that point, we were told that we were officially in the CBD 1080 Construction Battalion, which was a group of replacements and additions to existing divisions. They sent us to the rifle range, gave us brand new M1 carbines, and we were dressed like Marines, except our particular equipment said USM rather than USMC. With all this, they then sent us aboard trains to San Francisco. And there in San Francisco on Treasure Island, we were assigned to a troop carrier, and we boarded a troop carrier, and there were about 1,200 of us Seabees, which were CBD 1080. All aboard were Seabees and Marines. And there we went to the boarded ship. We were the only transport used. And there was an equal amount of Seabees and Marines aboard. I think the group was maybe around 3,000, 1,500 Seabees and about 1,500 Marines. We arrived in Hawaii, and there in Hawaii, they formed a convoy. From there, we went a group of 12 to 14 ships, and we were heading into the Western Pacific Islands. All we knew was we were going into the Western Pacific. We still had no destination in mind. We arrived in the Western Pacific in the Marshall Islands, and as the film will show you, it was taken over by the Marines who invaded the Marshalls. There was Anahuac, Kwajalein, and the Marshall Islands were a huge archipelago. Eventually, Bikini Island was part of this archipelago. We were there a very short time, and most of the Marines went ashore there as replacements to existing Marines who were either died in battle and so forth, and they brought things up to standard. But it was quite a sight to see the devastation there, and it just was breathless for a 19-year-old to see this. Next thing we knew, we went by 2 ships north, and we went to the Marianas, the Northern Marianas. The Northern Marianas are 100 miles north of Guam, towards Japan, 100 miles north. And there, we were officially in the CBD 1080 group, but when we were there, all of us became attached to and part of the 4th Marine Division and the 121st Naval Construction Battalion. So we were absorbed into the construction battalion, which was on the 4th Marine, which was in the part of the 4th Marine Division. The Tinian Island, the Army was in charge of the 27th Infantry Division, was in charge of Saipan. And there were 2 Marine divisions, the 4th Marine Division and the 2nd Marine Division. All 3 were in on the invasion. The 4th Marine Division invaded Tinian, saw it completely to themselves. The 2nd Marine Division invaded Guam after leaving Saipan. The 27th Infantry Division stayed there on Saipan. Apparently, unknown to us, it was decided that Tinian and Saipan were the 2 islands necessary, in addition to Guam, to launch B-29 bombers, which were supposedly going to be used to destroy Japan and destroy their military ability. The next slide shows you the 2 islands. North you look at Saipan, and south you see Tinian Island. I spent 12 months on Tinian and 6 months on Saipan. The initial landing, we landed in the south part of Tinian Island and went ashore in Tinian Town. The other slide shows you an aerial view of the harbor area, which is on the bottom left. In black, that is the harbor area we landed in. The duty of the 121st Naval Construction Battalion was split into 2 divisions. One division was the Harbor Division, which I was assigned to. The other was the Airfield Division. And here on the map, you'll notice that there are, on the south part, when you're looking south, there's an airfield there, and that airfield was Westfield, which was near the harbor area. And that airfield was designated to be used by the Navy, and later on, they used that airfield for B-29s. And we were in an area on the bottom, just where it was considered no man's land. The highest point on Tinian was the southern part of the island. The invasion of Tinian took place at the northern part, across the strait from Saipan. And it was conceived of as a deception. The Japanese had all their troops in the south part of the island, figuring as though that was the area we would most attack, because most of the island was coral reef. The reefs were as high as the wall here, and some were even higher, and limestone. And there was only one real area of beach, which was on the western side, but that was huge. They mined it. Tractor-driven landing craft that went across the channel from Saipan. And the island was eventually considered secure. And once it was considered secure, but the Japanese retreated to the highest point of the island, and it was as though you were going down an odd road here, past Abigail's and going to Avon. If you look to your left, this southern part of the island had this huge cliff, which was either limestone and coral. And that's where the Japanese had made tunnels, and that's where they retreated to and stayed there. The Marines were in charge of that area to make sure that they did not infiltrate the rest of the island. The third slide you see is Tinian Island from an aerial view. This is about, this was taken from a B-29 bomber. In the upper left-hand corner, you can maybe make out that there is an airplane, a B-29 bomber. What you're looking at, you're looking south towards Guam, 100 miles away. The nearest point to you is these 4 airstrips. This was the largest airfield built in the world, anywhere in the world, during World War II. Northfield, Tinian Island. In the distance, you'll see another 2 airstrips. That was Westfield, Tinian Island. Northfield is famous for that assembly of the atomic bomb. Each one of those strips had 50 B-29s. So if you count 4 strips, there were 200. But there was also a lot of hard stands around there in the island, and I think it was between 350 and 400 B-29s eventually were parked there. And that's where the Enola Gay was stationed. But when the construction, you'll notice that 3 of the airstrips had those little dots. Those little dots were coral reef hard stands on which was parked a B-29. So the strip nearest you on the bottom, you'll notice that there's no dots. That was under construction. So the only 3 were actually built at that time. They were building, the Army engineers were building across the channel on Saipan, on the Silo field. They were building one huge airfield for B-29s. That was the first island invaded, so they were way ahead. And when we arrived, there were only 2 airstrips finished, and then there was a 3rd strip. But as the description says, I was assigned to the harbor area, receiving cargo, supplies, and transferring from Higgins boats to shore transport. So the particular unit I was in was stevedores. We worked in the harbor. We worked as ships brought in cargo. But we did not have any, we didn't do anything with munitions, nor did we do anything with fuel. It was a separate place where there were the CVs built on the western side of the island, where all the munitions and so forth, they could not come into the harbor. Only cargo could come into the harbor.
Before you switch, one question, one comment. What were the Japanese activity on the island when you were there?
Well, the island was primarily sugarcane. It was Japanese land, and it was the first Japanese land that we invaded in the Pacific. Saipan and Tinian. It was Japanese held, and they used it for sugarcane. So all you see here is the Japanese. The sugarcane fields were burnt by the Seabees. There was another battalion of Seabees besides the 121st that I was in, was completely assigned to the area doing civil engineering, preparing the runways and so forth. And the 121st was with them. There was the two Seabees. And the Japanese knew, because the individuals on south part of the island apparently were sending signals back home by radio and so forth about the progress being made. And we had the Bonin Islands north of us, 30, 40 miles away was a string of about 4 or 5 islands, which were Bonin Islands, which were held by the Japanese. And they had airfields on them, and they would come and some would strafe the harbor area, some would strafe the runways, and then they would have bombing runs on the runways. That continued for a period of February 1945, March 45, until approximately April 1st, when the invasion of Okinawa took place. That air raids were non-existent. But for a 60-day period there, when B-29s were coming in from India, they were stationed in India and in China, and they were trying to reach Japan from India, China. But most of the aircraft that they used, they burned out engines left and right because it was such a long trip. The trip from Tinian Island to the area of Japan was 6 hours up, 6 hours back, a round trip of 12 hours. The next slide probably is shows you the harbor area where I was stationed, and the harbor area is in the distance. It's not a very good picture. But in the foreground is sugarcane that had to be cut, and they had huge fires of burning sugarcane. And they let it grow wild. But you see that there were Quonset huts built for storage of equipment, storage of supplies up from the harbor area. And because Tinian from the air resembled Manhattan Island, and the Navy captain who laid it out, on your left, if you're looking at the photograph, you can see a line that was called Broadway. That was Broadway, and you get a picture of it in the magazine or yearbook. But that was Broadway, and it was all meant for vehicles that had rubber tires. There was another 8th Avenue was to your right, and that was from the harbor area, and that would be for tanks and anything they used in cleated equipment. They didn't want to use it, and it was very dusty because there was just coral. One thing the Seabees got, though, asphalt runways. They brought a asphalt plant from Hawaii, and it was assembled just above Northfield. And that provided enough for the asphalt to be laid on the 4 runways and the 2 on Westfield. And so they assembled a asphalt plant there just for, but all the other parking of B-29s was on coral that was brought in because the island was coral and limestone. Here's a picture of the limestone excavation. There were at least a dozen pits like this that worked around the clock, crushing coral, and most of the stuff was done by steam shovels. Steam shovels loaded it into trucks, and they were used constantly on Broadway. That was where it'd be 24 hours around the clock. The trucks would deliver crushed coral, and then there was road graders would level it out and so forth, and then they would build hard stands. Here's a picture of the B-29. The B-29s that came from China were the 20th Air Force. The 20th Air Force was Army, and they brought in the B-29s, which were the first aircraft you could go aboard in shorts. B-17s and B-24s were not pressurized. B-29s were pressurized. And so you'll notice in front of this CB B-29, which was named after our division, the 121st Naval Construction Battalion, they were so grateful that we had built the runways with asphalt that would make it easier for them to take off. While in China, they had apparently crushed stone and crushed rocks, and it was not the best thing to use for takeoff. So there was apparently a dozen or more B-29s that were named for the division I was in, 121st Naval Construction Battalion, but the division itself. Here's a picture of the Enola Gay. It's got an R in it, but it should be Enola Gay, G-A-Y. Enola Gay was the name of the aircraft commander, Colonel Tibbets. And that was I think his mother's name. Mother's name was Enola Gay. And her maiden name. That aircraft, and all the B-29s had a marker on the back of their tail, and you could tell whether they were Guam, Tinian, or Saipan. The ones we used on Saipan either had a diamond in the tail, or they used an R or an A. The ones for Saipan had a T on it, I remember a T. And the ones for Guam had something else of the alphabet. Occasionally, some could not reach Guam, which was 100 miles further, and they would have to land on Tinian, and you would see them. But most of those on Tinian had a symbol on the tail. One thing that kept us very safe was the introduction of a squadron of P-61 Black Widow night fighters. There was a squadron on Tinian and there was a squadron on Saipan. And they were all Army. Everybody's familiar with the U-2, which were made very famous. This too was a very guarded airplane. It followed the P-38 Lockheed P-38 Lightning. We had mostly at Westfield, escorts were P-51 Mustangs would escort the B-29s. But this squadron was stationed on Northfield where the B-29s were. And they would go out on patrol every night in groups of 3. And they would fly right over us if you were in the harbor. Count on it. And these were called Black Widow. They were coal black. And they had a crew of 3. There was a pilot. There was a navigator, bombardier, and radar officer in the forward end. because the aircraft had a rotating radar. And up on top was a turret gunner. Turret gunner had two I believe, 20mm cannons, 2 or 4, I'm not sure now. And then they would spot wherever the Japanese aircraft were, and they would shoot down. And they would fly towards the Philippines, others would go up north. And the Japanese did not seem to have any night fighters. They had a lot of aircraft. And these would, you could almost set your clock, but every evening you would see people, 3 or 6, fly right out into the Pacific. Picture here of me on Tinian Island in front of the 121st, and it was ship's shore, the store on Tinian Island. And this is the particular platoon I was in, platoon number 3, Company G. And everybody, these were all dressed in working clothes. And I'm the guy with the t-shirt on.
Why, Ben?
Oh, yes. And over here, the next you see Busy Bees, U.S. Navy Busy Bees. This is a taxiway on Northfield, and made famous by the Enola Gay and the boxcar in August of '45. And you could see, if you wanted to, I've got photographs here which are more distinct. And I think you can count up to 23 to 24 B-29s sitting on hard stands. And over here were hard stands completed but empty. And either the aircraft that were parked there were on a mission, or it may have been that they were waiting for others to come in from China or the United States. But this is a pretty good view of Northfield. Next is some language about Guam was the headquarters of the 20th Air Force. The head, Curtis LeMay was a general of the 8th Air Force in England, and he was in charge up until January of '45 of the attacks going on in Germany from the 8th Air Force. He was selected when it was decided to bring a new commander into the 20th Air Force, which was coming from China. He was selected to be in charge of the B-29s as they arrived from China and from the United States, well, mostly from China. And Saipan had 1 runway for B-29s by Army Air Corps engineers. That was exclusive Army Air Corps. While on Tinian, it was Marines, Navy, and Army Air Corps flyers that came in, and the P-61s and the P-38 fighters and P-51. The runways, Northfield and Westfield, and on the Westfield, it was a combination of Navy Ventura bombers, which were used for mining and for depth charges on Japanese submarines. They were like B-24s, and except they had a huge one tail. B-24s normally have a split tail. But these Ventura Navy bombers, which carried depth charges, had one large tail, like the B-17, apparently to keep it stable while it dropped depth charges on Japanese submarines. Before invading Japan, Iwo Jima had to be captured for refueling, rescue, and emergency. And this was done shortly after we arrived on the island, we learned about the invasion taking place at Iwo Jima. And because prior to that, there weren't huge groups that flew out of Saipan and out of Tinian, were maybe groups of 25 to 50 aircraft out of Guam. But thereafter, after we took Iwo Jima, they went into the hundreds of flights, hundreds out of the three, and building it up. And it was truly in March and April that really the bombing started. But Curtis LeMay apparently came, and they discovered that the B-29s flying over Japan came into a air current that would carry them beyond their speed. If their speed was, say, 300 miles an hour, they were suddenly doing 375, almost exceeding, and they would miss their targets because there was this jet stream right over Japan. And so he came in and he decided that the thing to do is to do bombing with incendiaries at night and low bombing and do the cities. Until then, the bombing was nighttime bombing. And we then noticed that the aircraft were leaving at different times. The 4 runways on Northfield, the aircraft would take off with 2 a minute. Every 30 seconds, one would take off. And it would take almost 2 to 3 hours to get them all airborne. Wow. Because there were that many before they went. And they would assemble in the sky, and you would see them assemble. They were coming from Guam, and they would go towards Japan. The Army invaded Okinawa April 1st, 1945, and that was a joint base invasion with both Army and infantry and Marine Corps. It was a joint invasion. That was the first time. Saipan was invaded with one Army infantry division and 2 Marine divisions, 2 and 4, and Army 27. And they did the same thing at Okinawa. It was Army, infantry, and many Marine divisions. Pacific status updated April 1st, 1945. The 4th Marines, Army, and Naval Forces met in Okinawa. Apparently it was decided that the invasion of Okinawa would be a joint Air Force, Army, Navy, and Marine invasion, preparing them that they would eventually need that cooperation between all these different units to invade Japan. But what happened is the atomic bomb was being assembled. April 19, Jap sub came in that night and attacked Northfield. They knew that this is where the attacks were coming from Northfield. Japanese came in from the east in the morning and from the west in the evening with Betty bombers. They had Betty bombers north of us in the Bonin Islands. But once we invaded, once the Battle of Iwo Jima had taken place, we saw no more bombing from those Bonin Islands because they retreated. And I guess Iwo Jima is what? Volcanic island. Iwo means volcanic. Jima is island in Japanese. Iwo Jima. And there's others, Chichi-jima and others that were up north there. And it was one of those islands, George Herbert Walker Bush had the duty to destroy a radar station there, and that's where he was shot down on the run and was eventually rescued by a submarine. One of them was Chichi-jima. The trip to Japan, bombing Japan, was a 6-hour ride from Tinian, Saipan, and Guam. Approximately 6 hours. Up, 6 hours back. That was the nearest point. That was the nearest point. Was a round trip of 12 hours. And then when we got invaded in February, Iwo Jima, I think it was a 30-day battle. And some B-29s on the way back couldn't make it all the way to the Marianas. They landed there right while the battle was in progress on the Japanese airfield. One thing you can take pride in, there was a huge Army, Marine Corps, and Navy mission that made it possible for us to avoid having to put land forces on an invasion into Japan. The Air Force did their job of bombing. The Marines and Navy did their invasion work and made the island secure. And the Seabees did their part. And the Seabees were primarily individuals. Average age of a Seabee was 31. 31. And these were individuals who had real talents in being civil engineers. A lot were from Rensselaer, Rensselaer and Wentworth from Boston, under engineering schools. I was right out of high school, so I was just perfect guy to work in the harbor, hanging car. But out of the CD in the yearbook, on the invasion of both Saipan and Tinian, there were 14 Seabees killed out of the 121st Naval Construction Battalion. Died in service, 5 died in service. 1 received a Navy Marine Corps medal. There were 27 Bronze Stars given to Seabees. And 71 Purple Hearts. That's in the outfit I was in, 121st Naval Construction Battalion. One thing I do remember, though, is Presidential Union Citation, our North Field, which was the field from which the Enola Gay and the Boxcar, the B-29s that carried the 2 atomic bombs, flew. We were told to assemble on the field, and we are there way in the background. Individuals flew in from Hawaii, a group flew in from Hawaii, and this was, I believe this was like March of 1945. After Iwo Jima was secure. Iwo Jima was secure. They came in and they had us, we marched out in the field, and the unit received a Presidential Unit Citation for outstanding performance in combat during the seizure of Japanese-held islands of Saipan and Tinian in the Marianas from June 15 to August 1st, 1944. And it was the seizure of those islands that made it possible for the B-29s to come in. The atomic bomb was an additional one, and those activities, we didn't have to put boots on the ground to invade Japan. Because up to that point, it was feared we would have to invade Japan and take each island into the Japanese, because there was no way of winning the war unless you defeated them. They would not surrender. They didn't understand what the white flag was of surrender. And it would have been very difficult. Another 18 months of war, I'm sure, would have been possible by the Japanese if it wasn't for the atomic bomb and individuals in B-29s that saved us from having to invade Japan. Well, CV say, can do. That's a CV motto. And if you ever go to Washington, D.C., on the way to Arlington Cemetery, past some traffic islands there on the road, almost near the Arlington Cemetery, is a CV monument. And the CV monument says, with compassion for others, we build, we fight for peace with freedom. And one of the saying is, the urgent we can do today, the impossible will take a little while longer. That's the CV story. And I was very fortunate to be part of the CVs and the 4th Marine Division.
You're missing a slide. Wait a minute. Hold on, there's one more slide. For some reason, I guess it didn't print out, Ben?
Oh, just one here.
No,
The one behind it.
no, behind you.
No, with respect to that page.
Oh my. After Japan surrendered, demilitarized Tinian, yes. What took place is us CBs had the duty of decommissioning the battalions. We were on Tinian, and we had trucks and jeeps. Some of them were never driven. Some came off the ship and were put in the cargo areas and sat there. And they gave us instructions. All the trucks and jeeps are going to be sent to the Philippines. None of them are going back to the United States. And we heard, well, the president said to General Motors and all the other manufacturers, don't worry about what you send overseas. It won't come back to the United States. It's going to go out. And it'll be used in battle, destroyed in battle, or it'll stay on the island, whatever it was. So we followed the duty to sending it to our, at that time it was part of the United States, the Philippines. And we sent all the trucks and jeeps there to the Philippines. Anything with weapons, artillery, and ammunition, anything of a fighting nature was sent on cargo ship back to Hawaii. Higgins and dark landing boats across the channel to Saipan. Those individuals, those boats were used in the harbor area. So most of them stayed behind, which we used them to so those were used, and who knows, they may have stayed there. In January 1946, moved to Saipan to continue their not right. In January 1946, we had completed between September and January all the shipping out of all the equipment. So they combined the two units together. They put us on Saipan, and we continued doing more cargo work there. Left mid-June for San Francisco. In mid-June, by that time, about 6 months on Saipan, then had enough points to get back to the United States. Because they went on a first in, first out basis. If you were first in to the Pacific, you returned first back home. And not having that much time overseas, I had to wait my turn, and eventually was put on a ship, and we went, picked up individuals in Guam. We boarded in Saipan, went to Guam, picked up more in Guam. Then we went to the islands of, towards the Philippines, Pelilu and Palau and Pelilu islands, the big chain of islands there. And there we went nonstop from Palau with Marines. We skipped Hawaii and we went right to San Francisco Bay. And there boarded a train and came to Brooklyn, New York, where I was separated on Long Island in Lido Beach, Long Island. That was August 1946. About the middle of August 1946. Quite an
Clap
adventure.
now. Yep.
Quite an adventure.
Questions?
Yeah.
Ben, did you work with any of the colored battalions in the islands?
They were ammunition. They worked. They wouldn't let ammunition ships come into the harbor where we were.
Go to the one that shows
They
the
built
cave,
special piers for them.
the one that shows the cave and the.
Keep on, man.
Yeah,
I got a question for him, but I want to have a backdrop.
yeah.
first.
Those were near Northfield. When I mentioned Northfield, they built separate piers into the western part of the island, where they allowed tankers to come in, and tankers would unload their fuel for the B-29s. And there were piers there. They ran these piers where the Seabees were known for building these piers, these big blocks of steel, and building a pier. Well, in Tinian Harbor, we didn't allow any tankers, nor did they allow any ships with munitions on them, Peter. They had to go to that special place. Because they were afraid that, I guess, if they were caught in an air raid, they would be blown up.
Couple questions, Ben.
But as far as those individuals were primarily black Americans on those ships. Those were black Americans on the cargo, and handled the fuel and handled the ammunition and loading.
The slide up there now is the one of the cave and the looking at the harbor area
Yeah,
where the sugar cane is. You pointed out the sugar cane.
yeah, no,
The mountains over in the top.
yeah.
That's the no man's land.
That's the no
Japanese-
man's land. You can see it in the distance, right? But it was at least the height of what you would find on Norton Road, where
Right.
the Hugh Bland Tower is. It was at least that. If you went up quite a bit, and the Japanese apparently built all these tunnels in there, and that's where they retreated to. They retreated to there, waiting for further instructions.
And that's the picture on the right, is you standing in front of one of those tunnels.
Yeah, that's one of those. Yeah.
And the other question I had in the books, it says that the Japanese were committing suicide by jumping off of the cliffs.
Now, that is primarily on Saipan. Saipan was the first invasion, where the 27th Infantry Division and the 2nd and the 4th were involved. And what took place,
But your comment was on here, they were pushing the civilians off the cliff.
well, they were on Saipan, they were. On Tinian, they were not. But
Okay.
on Saipan, they were. Marky Point. I'm trying to get the picture of
Of Saipan?
now Saipan is here.
Yeah.
And on Saipan, Marky Point. After the war was over, the shooting war was over, and we were there. It was the highest point on Saipan. And most of Koreans and Japanese civilians were on Saipan. And there were some on Tinian. But when the Marines and the Army and Seabees invaded, the Japanese retreated to Marky Point. Marky Point was a sheer drop, I would say, of at least 150. It was a sheer cliff right down, and it had a bench or a beach. It was not a beach, it was covered by low tide. When the high tide came in, you couldn't see it. And when it went out, it was there. And that's where the civilians were committed suicide jumping off those cliffs. And that was the highest point on Saipan. But the Japanese, apparently the Japanese military forced the civilians to jump off. And some jumped with children and all that. It was a real massacre. It was over 30,000 Japanese military died, and another 20,000, I think, civilians. About almost 50,000 were lost on Saipan. At Marpy Point, Armed Forces Radio, when we were on Tinian, they would come on and they would give news for about 15 minutes. But they didn't want to stay on too long because they were afraid the Japanese would use the signal from the Armed Forces Radio to come to the island. So they would come on and they would with 2 minutes news. We're making advances in Europe. The fighter bombs, they're bombing Europe. And the Allies are making advances, very bland stuff. And then they say, we're broadcasting from Marpy Point Country Club on the beautiful island of Saipan and looking out over the blue Pacific. And at this country club, you could hear women's voices splashing in the water and all that. You could hear them swimming and some men say, oh, I'll have a martini. And they'll say, hey, I'll have a highball. And so forth. We're broadcasting from the country club. We get wars over. Everyone wants to see where is this country club. So we get to Saipan and we go there. The guy's sitting in a tent, broadcasting. No country club, no. But that was Armed Forces Radio. But these two islands were captured from the Japanese, the first 2 Japanese land we invaded. And today, they have the territorial status of Puerto Rico. We never gave it back to the Japanese. That's land that we kept. Iwo Jima was returned to the Japanese because it's considered a graveyard. They lost so many people there. And the United States vacated the island there, and a lot of Japanese go there. And they still come to Saipan and Tinian occasionally. Saipan has some beautiful beaches. But we've now got a governor of Saipan and Tinian Islands. And representing those 2 islands in the federal legislature in Washington are representatives the same status as Puerto Rico, or islands in the Caribbean.
Len, you had a question?
Yeah, this is a humorous point of interest. A couple of us here earlier tonight had the privilege of hearing Ben tell what motivated him to go into the Navy after graduating from New Britain High School. His rationale is very different from mine when I graduated from New Britain High School and went into the Navy. You want to tell us about those couple of animals?
Oh, yeah. I got fascinated going to the New Britain Library. I went there, 14, 15, 16-year-old. Library was my main attraction. Read all kind of books about Indians and so forth and so on. Then I would write books about travel. I said, my God, they've got kangaroos in Australia. They've got tigers in India. Elephants in India. So when I was getting out of high school, I said, gee, that's the place to go. I get aboard a ship, and I'll go see those tigers. I'll see those kangaroos. I'll see all that. I was just fascinated to think as though you would see them in the wild. And so that's what made me choose the Navy. But like everything else, I got into the land Navy. I just had a ride out and a ride back, but it was a nice journey.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hey, Ben, when you guys were leaving Tinian and you shipped all the jeeps and trucks out and all the ammo out, etc., did you leave all the runways and everything else intact, or did you have to do anything to
No, what they did is, now you can go on the internet and you can see Tinian Island and so forth, where the Enola Gay, where the pits were used to put the atomic bomb into the bay and so forth. The runways, from the 4 runways, which were these huge runways, 2 are distinguishable. The others have been taken over by jungle. You can't tell. Northfield, which had 4 big runways. The distance of, you can imagine, Iron Horse Boulevard, all the way from there, all the way up to here. All of that, all the asphalt that was put on there is now got trees growing through it. It's been taken over by jungle. It's been taken over. Because the island itself is not as attractive to visitors as Saipan. Saipan is got beautiful beaches, and they've got hotels there. A lot of Japanese come from Japan to visit there because that is a very beautiful island. Very nice, nice sandy beaches. While Tinian is more for agriculture and sugarcane, growing sugarcane.
Anything else?
But I was rewarded tremendously by the government. I went to college and got an education. They rewarded me tremendously for being in the service. For a kid right out of high school, could barely tie his shoes.
That happens in the brain.
It was quite an adventure.
Tom and Ben and I can say that.
It happened.
One thing you didn't bring up was that your girlfriend went in the service at the same time.
My girlfriend, who eventually became my wife, and written up in the hypercurrent. It was Valentine's Day, 1944, and we were going to graduate in June, and we go out and we're having dinner, and she said, "I've seen a poster that says if you're 17 years old or 18, you can join the nurse corps." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yes. They showed a poster to me at the high school." I said, "Well, what do you plan to do?" "Oh, I'm going to join the nurse corps." She said, "A free education." "Well, if you join the nurse corps, I'll join the Navy." And that was
Girls ahead of kangaroos.
and that's how I came.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Oh,
Thank you,
yes,
Ben.
you're very welcome.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.